Hey everybody, it's James Davis back from DragTheBar. Today I'll be making a video playing two tables of mid-stakes Holdem on full tilt poker. I have a table right now, a 2-4 and a 1-2, and just trying to get a sense for how these stakes are slightly below what I normally play, and I want to get a sense for how my opponents are going to basically just play at these levels. Are they going to 3-bet me a lot? Are they going to respond well if I 4-bet? How's their aggression going to be post-flop, and so on and so forth. I'm inclined to think that opponents at these stakes aren't going to adjust quite as well to my post-flop aggression as they will at higher stakes, and likewise I don't know how well they're going to be able to deal if they're lightly 3-betting me, how well they'll deal with my 4-bets. So my strategy going in to a game where I'm a relative unknown is typically to play pretty aggressively. So I go ahead and 3-bet the king 7 offsuit. And once again, I always like to sort of establish a pretty bluffy image early on in order to try and get paid off later. And I think it's always better for me, the way my game works, to look bluffy as opposed to look tight. So I flop an open-ended straight draw with the king 7. I consider going for a check raise, something like that, but I think on that board I just have to bet, not get too cute, not let my opponent play for pot control, because if I flopped huge, I would always bet. And I think that I think that checking there just gives him too many routes to showdown. And now I consider 3-betting Freddie here, but I don't have a huge sample on him, but he hasn't folded to a 3-bet yet in his history, so I decided to just go ahead and give it up. Now I actually played this session a little bit earlier, but the audio was lost, so that explains why I am just trying to remember what I was thinking at the time, but in general just talking over this session after that I had played earlier. And so now I'm happy that I 3-bet the king 7 earlier, because now I can get away with 3-betting the ace king. And I hope my opponent's going to be a little more likely to play back at me with something like ace queen, ace jack. But they both fold, and that's not terrible. Of course, there was already $24 dead in the pot. So I got in a few interesting spots in this session. Got in some good spots where folks were playing back at me, and I was able to counter their aggression with my own aggression and make some pretty good reads, and as well my usual slew of mistakes. So with the ace jack I consider a 3-bet. Ultimately I decide just to go ahead and make the call. And that's simply because I don't necessarily want to take the pot down right away if he does have a dominated ace, and I'm pretty sure that if I 3-bet and he has a bigger ace, I mean, he might just call something like ace queen or something, putting me in a pretty annoying situation later on. And likewise, if he has like queen jack, jack 10, king jack, I want him to be able to come to the flop and make a worse hand than me. So I check call the flop, thinking that I could very well be ahead. When he checks back the turn, I debate between checking and firing, but ultimately I just decide there's no reason not to just fire it off, because if he would expect me to check with a lot of hands, like small pairs and stuff, and there's really no bluffs I can have from his perspective. Ace 4 came there on the turn. If I had ace 5, I would probably just check and take a showdown since I have a pair. So I just bet as a sort of a safety measure against something like ace king, ace queen, or a pair below 7s, because I don't think at that point it would be prudent for him to call pocket 4s or pocket 6s. Next world champ is a good aggressive player who I play with a lot, so I'm not going to be attacking his blinds too lightly. On the other hand, with the jack 9 offsuit over there, there's a lot of money in the pot. I know gone shipping is going to be aware of isolation, so I decided to just stick in a 3-bet and let him make a tough choice. And once again, I can never stress enough the importance of thinking about how you make your name, because a name like Gone Shipping can just never be like a total know-nothing donkey. Um, I mean, it might be someone who thinks he knows more than he actually does, but more likely it's someone who's studied a lot of poker, reads poker forums where people say like "ship it," stuff like that all the time. So when I make a name, I mean, unless you want that image, I certainly don't. So I, uh, I typically go with names that sound a little stupider. And separate from the other ace-jack situation I played before, I do decide to go ahead and 3-bet here because there's more opponents left to act behind me. I don't want them to squeeze and for me to be in a tough spot. And similarly, I'll be in position against Eagle if he decides to take a flop, which is always an advantage, of course. When the flop comes all low cards, it's somewhat close between betting and checking because my opponent's most likely hands are like ace-king, ace-jack, ace-queen, or small pair. I decide that I don't know enough about him, so he could have something like 8-9, 9-10, some donkey business. So I decided to just put a bet in and make it a little easier on myself. Because if I am ahead, there's no reason to let him catch up. And if I'm behind, I figure he'll let me know right there. And when hung deep hosts, I have a pretty easy isolation raise with the king-9 suited. My plan was to 4-bet next world champ if he 3-bet, thinking that he would do so, understanding that I was trying to isolate. And that's something that it's a play. It's a little more in vogue now in general, but I think that it's a pretty good one as far as dealing with folks who understand the 3-bet game but are not going to 5-bet bluff me all in, and that's a pretty rare opponent even as you go up in stakes, and are not going to properly widen their 5-bet all in range. I'll do a lot of bluff 4-betting, especially if I have a high card in my hand with which to take another high card out of their range. And by that I simply mean if I have an ace in my hand, that's one less ace in the deck for him to have, even if I'm not going to necessarily commit all in. And I'll take a quick second to explain my HUD to you. The numbers I really use in the HUD are the top ones. It's voluntarily put in pot, times they enter the pot on their own, pre-flop raise percentage, and then the one all the way on the right is their 3-bet percentage. But if I really need a specific stat, and there are a lot that I do use in Holdem Manager, I will simply click on their box, and what I call the big box comes up, and that's that yellow box you saw before, where I can study a lot of information about my opponent to make it more likely that I can make a well-informed decision. And so I just go ahead and make a note that he bluffed 4-bet pre-flop, because that's it's always a good thing to know that your opponent's capable of doing that. I might make it just a little less likely that I'll bluff 3-bet them if I know that they're capable of doing that. And so at the time I just wanted to make sure that I hadn't missed anything. And yeah, you see, so Gone Shipping had cold 4-bet, which is so strong. When I raise under the gun, Lepakopes re-raises in the cutoff, and a guy 4-bets from the small blind. Oh, sorry, he bluffed 5-bet because they were deep. So, and once again, during the time of the video, I had missed that as well. So I went back and changed it. And that's an even sort of a rarer beast, someone that will bluff 5-bet. So unless that guy's a total donkey, which I don't suspect is the case, I'm going to really keep my eye on him and make sure that I don't get in a situation where I allow him to bluff me off the best hand. And likewise, I might be more likely to call down lightly against him or sort of do funky stuff to try to induce action against him. Now I raise a pretty wide range on the button, but Jack-6 offsuit is just not enough, so I pitch it. I'm actually trying to tighten up a little bit. I think have been playing a little too loosely in early positions in games where there's heavy 3-betting. And you see me make a red note. A red note simply means that that's a player I want to keep my eye out for. And so if I'm scrolling through tables to sit at and I see a red, I'll just sit with that player. So haha, I pony is going to get the red mark as well. Because playing a 57-14 is unorthodox, to say the least. So, just going to make a little red note. Keep my eyes peeled if he's ever playing again. And if I'm multi-tabling, it really helps. I don't even need to look up at the stats if because there's a lot of situations that I'll just play one way if I'm against a reasonable player and play one way against a red player. So it's been a pretty standard session so far. I think I built up a nice aggressive image. You can see my numbers there. Certainly I don't normally play a 39-36 with a 23 3-bet percentage or a 50-40 with a 33 3-bet percentage. But you see no one's even really played back at me at all yet, so I've been in a really pretty good groove so far as taking down a lot of pots but keeping suspicions very high. I haven't had to show down any winners yet. And, that's simply a good position to be in. Yes, I remember this guy, DeJerry, had really sort of took me out of my element a little bit with all the min-raising on the button. And that's a nice job by him, because the reason he does that is because it makes it a lot more expensive for me to 3-bet without giving him the odds to call. So if I 3-bet and he only has 6 in the pot, putting 24 in there gives him more money when he actually has a hand, and costs me when he actually has a hand. Whereas if he just wants to fold for the $6, that saves him, or the $8, that saves him another $4 that a lot of people would lose by making it 3 times the blind. But then with the King-9 suited, I just go ahead and 3-bet him pre-flop because it's a fairly strong hand. I'm not going to call it and open it up to next world champ to re-raise. And I do, like I said, just want to get a feel for how he's going to play and how he's going to respond to my high level of aggression that I like to bring when I'm playing with unknown opponents. And the more you play with people, the less this sort of superficial 3-betting and stuff really works. So I suspect if I became a regular at these games, I wouldn't necessarily be wheeling and dealing, 3-betting a quarter of my hands and playing a 36-30, 38-36. This is more just lip service for their benefit, just trying to show them that I'm capable of anything, when in reality I'm probably going to be tightening it up at some point and playing a lot more solid of a game, especially if they catch me in a big bluff or I see them re-raising me enough that the frequency of their re-raises suggests that they are properly adjusting to things. And you can see my mouse hovering, trying to will me to raise Queen 10 offsuit there, but Queen 10 offsuit is a clear fold. That's the type of hand that basically is just garbage. I think basically on the button it's playable, maybe in the small blind against a big blind, or defending the big blind against a small blind, it's fine. But in like middle position, early position, hands like that, what am I hoping to just make top pair? And even if I do, I'm never going to know if I'm good or not, because King Queen, Queen Jack, and Jack, King 10, Ace 10, stuff like that are hands that tons of people play but don't necessarily always re-raise. So it's just really hard to make a good top pair that you really feel like value betting. So then with the Ace 7 suited, I just decided to go ahead and kick it up. Same thing, I have an ace in my range. He hasn't really played back at any 3-bets yet, so I figure it can't hurt just to try and pick up a pot. And if he calls, Ace 7 suited still makes a few decent flops, so I'm not like killing myself if he calls. 6-3 offsuit, I decided to raise with the intention of 4-betting if 3-bet. Because I know Lupa Copes is, or whatever that guy's name is really capable of 3-betting, but I don't know. He doesn't really know me, so I don't think he's going to bluff 5-bet me all in if we've never played before today. And the 8-9 suited, I decided to go ahead and give it a call. It's the type of hand where I'd like to see a flop against a poor opponent. And you see Lupicope's putting in another 4-bet. I think he could easily be buffing there, but Fast Phil doesn't want to look him up. And I believe no, I make a good fold. Okay. Yeah, it can be tempting to call with that 8-9 suited stuff, but out of position against a fairly aggressive player, you're just going to flop too much garbage, you know. I mean, I might flop an 8 or something, like a Queen 8-2 board. I really just don't know how to proceed. And similarly, or for another reason, Hug D is a poor player, and I think Next World Champ knows that, and that he's not going to go buck wild 3-betting him lightly. On the reverse, I have pocket jacks now, and I just folded, so my intention is to 4-bet him here with the idea of getting it all in. And he isn't the type to fold to 4-bets a lot, so my hope is that he would make this play with 10s and ace-king and ace-queen and stuff, enough to make it profitable, as well as his bluffs. Because, of course, sometimes he's always going to make this play with queens, kings, and aces, and you know, it's obviously not good for me to get in those spots, but it works out that against an aggressive opponent, I really do need to be 4-betting there, because once again, I don't really want to play jacks out of position, because there are just so many flops that can come where I just don't know how to proceed, and it's going to be pretty easy for him to proceed. If I check call a lot of flops, or even if I check raise and he has a pair bigger than mine or smaller than mine, there just aren't going to be too many great situations for me post-flop. Whereas if I go ahead and get it in right there, I run a pretty good chance of getting it in as a slight favorite against overcards, or even a big favorite against 10s or 9s. The ace-9 suited, I just go ahead and bet it. I feel like a poor opponent is fairly likely to bluff me on a queen-queen-8 suited board, so... And if he has a smaller flush draw than me, I think he's fairly likely to raise me too. And I don't want to get into a pot control situation if he has a hand that he would call down with that's dominated, like a small flush draw. Or if he would just pure bluff, but then maybe catch up underpaired at the board and, you know, decide to check it down and take it to pot. Whereas I want to give him the opportunity to check raise bluff flop, because my intention, of course, is to go all in and let him call me with a worse flush draw or fold bluffs that still have outs against me. Or call me with a queen and let me suck out with running aces or a flush. So I check to see how often Freddie raises in early position. I see it's 24%, which is pretty high, so I was probably considering some silliness there, like re-raising or calling. But Hog D jumps on it for me, forcing me to get out of the way. So you see, I've been pretty profitable so far, really without making any hands. You know, just chugging along with winning a lot of small pots with my aggression. And the 4-5 suited, I think, is good enough to call with when there are already 2 people in the pot and I'm closing the action. I don't think the table on the right there is especially good at all, but I do think I need to play it just for the sake of the video, you know, just because you're not always going to get to play against poor opponents, and I think playing against poor opponents is pretty easy. So here with the 4-5 suited, I consider raising, because I just don't know if Eagle would really do that with a strong hand. It's a pretty odd play to make, considering the board is just so dry, and it's going to be hard to get action from either of us if he has like 10-7s or deuces, but I decided to fold just because Fast Phil is still in the pot, and he can easily have a huge hand too. And he goes ahead and raises. I don't remember what happens here, but I'm pretty sure Eagle just gets away from him. And I'm raising wins the Hog D jackpot by getting him to get it in with 7s on a jack high board. Much to my chagrin, I'm sure. And yeah, Eagle gets away from it. And I just think that leading there with the intention of folding, it's just it's just so strange, because it just really can't be a huge hand. So I think he's sort of just giving it away by betting out there. If it's heads up, it's a different story, but in the 2 opponents, it's a little transparent for me. And same thing, 7-10 suited, just keep pounding away. Gone Shipping hasn't played back at me yet, so he's going to continue to feel it until he either gets a hand or decides to make a move. I hadn't really done much against Next World Champ, so I decided to raise the 4-3 suited, I believe with the intention of 4-betting. Oh, nope, I just got away. So yeah, I don't really love my play there if my intention is just to fold to a 3-bet, because he's just 3-betting such a wide range when I raise a small blind that I think that was a little dubious. And so I get aces on a king 10-7 suited board. You know, my plan basically here is just to go with it. There really aren't that many 2-pair combinations he can have. And of course I need to just keep betting for value. If he can have a king or a 10 that might decide to call down. But then without much thought, he just goes ahead and raises it. So it's sort of a funny spot because, you know, I have the ace of hearts, so that takes a lot of his flush draws that he would do this with out of his range. But there are just so many hands, like hearts with a 10, or queen jack of hearts, jack 9, 8, 9 of hearts. And I'm not huge favorites against those or anything, but I think he would also do this with like king queen. And really the only hand I'm worried about is pocket 7s, because I think he would re-raise 10s, given our re-raising history. And I think I might look a little tilted also, since I had just raised a small blind and folded his 3-bet, so I decided to just raise and go with it. But unfortunately he shows me 2 7s. Then he just makes 4 7s on the turn, and it's really tough to catch up to 4 7s. So I lose a big pot. But yeah, I still stand by my play. I mean, we were a little deep. I think we had 125 big blind stacks, but there's just, in my mind, nothing I can do to get away there against an aggressive winning opponent. So now I'm stuck a little bit, but it's basically been me winning tons of small pots and then one setup. I don't really think anyone who plays well gets away from aces on that previous board, so definitely not beating myself up over that play. Same thing with the 9-7 off. I believe I raise it with the hopes that I get 3-bet so I could 4-bet. And it's always nice to just take it down right away. King Jack offsuit, I think maybe I should just let it go, given my image. I think I was looking kind of tilted after losing that aces pot. And these guys are all pretty good opponents, so I think maybe I can just get away from King Jack there. Ace 10-7 board, I definitely think I need to fire off a continuation bet, because I would always do this with my mate hands, so. And I don't want to give him the opportunity to take it to showdown, because if I check back, I'm really just announcing that I can't have a huge hand. And the ace-8 offsuit here, I really hope I 4-bet, because this guy is just begging for it. And I have the ace, which, you know, actually increases my percent chance of winning the pot pretty substantially. And if he shoves on me here, I'm just going to figure that he had to have a hand. But given that it was 3-handed, he's on the button, I think I like my 4-bet there a lot. But unfortunately, he either had a hand or had me red, so he goes all in. And the other thing I like to do is always make a note when someone catches me bluff 4-betting, because, you know, I'm kind of thinking that if they go back to their notes sometime in the future, when they're facing a 4-bet against me, I figured that they're going to check. So I'll always, before bluff 4-betting a known opponent, check the note to see if he's caught me specifically bluff 4-betting. And once again, I really like to bluff 4-bet, because not only do I win a lot of pots with it, but even getting caught is not the end of the world, because I feel like that just really, really makes it more likely that my opponent's going to get it in with me at some point in the future in a dominated fashion. And that pays for itself pretty quickly if I'm playing against an opponent who would never go all in with ace-queen or ace-jack without a read that their opponent likes to bluff 4-bet, and then all of a sudden they're all in. And, you know, I have kings or queens or something, and they're just dominated, and being in a 70-30 is a great situation. So I click auto check fold Jack 4 off, but then I remember, when there's a poster in the pot, I can re-raise guys if they try to isolate, or I can just put in a big raise if they decide to give me the pot. And 7-9 suited on the left-hand table I think is a fold, so I'm glad I folded. And it looks like I decided to just go ahead and fold the Jack 4 off because I think maybe I was a little worried that I had just folded to that 4-bet and I had been 3-betting gun shipping a ton, and it's just such an obvious bluff spot that I decided just to hold back for a second. Because really you can't win every single pot, Yeah, because mid-stakes poker is really just a lot of bobbing and weaving, and it's just really keeping your eyes on your opponent and staying a step ahead, because it's not too terribly difficult to stay ahead of guys who are doing tons of multi-tabling. And their psychology is usually pretty similar, which is to play tight until they catch you do something and then over-adjust. So, yep, you saw I slammed the 6-10 offsuit there. And winning those small pot after small pot after small pot and creating an aggressive image, I really think that that's just a really winning style for these stakes. So I get King Jack suited on the button. I do like my decision to call there. I could, of course, 3-bet, but I think King Jack suited is a nice hand just to take a flop with every once in a while. It puts my opponent in a lot of tough spots. So I think there I was checking his c-bet percentage, and you can't see it on the screen because it's a little lower, but I think it's around like 48% or something if I remember correctly. So I think, I take a look at the board. I decided that this specific opponent might not c-bet on a board like that, given that I'm in position and he knows me to be a fairly tricky player. So I just decided to give it up, figuring that he had a good piece or that he was ready to rebluff me if I raised, or he was ready to continue to fire barrels if I called. So I get away. But I truly do recommend, whenever you're moving to a new site or playing new limits, when you get there, just be about as aggressive as possible. Because when people play against unknowns, they just don't think that unknowns are going to be out of line. So I think I just decided to defend the King 4 offsuit there because I just hadn't defended any hands against him yet, and I think I needed to just see a flop and see how he would react on various flops. So the river's an interesting spot. I think if I check, he never bluffs or bets worse. And I think that if I bet, he will occasionally call because I've really done nothing to show that I indeed have a queen. And obviously if I bet and he raises, I'm done with the hand. But I think that he can find a call with a hand like ace-jack or ace-10, given the fact that he has to know that he took a line that looks like it wants to go to showdown. So I don't think I get paid off all too often, but I definitely like a bet over a check. Because I think if I check and he bets, I basically have to fold. And that just feels a little funny. And with the 3-9 offsuit there, my thinking is that I'll take down the pot a majority of the time, and if not, he's playing pretty weakly, and I can take it down with a big bet on the flop if he misses. And I win yet another small pot. They call me the king of the small pots today. I really do think that the middle stakes games are also so full of pretty tight opponents, and they're not classically profitable like the way you would think. When you think guys I want to play against, you probably think of loose passive or huge lags that'll get in it with any pair on the flop, and those guys are definitely the ones I would seek out first. But overly tight opponents in a 6-max game can really make a lot of money off them, because, and this is a concept that I use a lot, so you'll hear it in future videos too, but each game that you'll sit in is at a different stage of poker evolution. So the highest games online, 500 to 1,000 on full tilt, those games are presumably at the highest level of evolution. However, as you go down, you'll find a lot of games at mixed stages, and mostly it's going to be different opponents. So what I mean by the evolutionary stages of a poker game, I mean things like there are certain games you can find where nobody even raises pre-flop, right? Like you can go to play live games where 6 people limp in. So having a really aggressive pre-flop strategy can be a dominant strategy in that game. Now, maybe that's the 1-2 game in the casino, but at the 2-4 game, now almost every player opens for a raise. However, if you re-raise them pre-flop, in that game, re-raising pre-flop is a sign that you have a big pair, so your opponents will play accordingly. And it can be a dominant strategy basically to re-raise anytime someone raises in late position. Now you might move up to another game where re-raising is very common. Let's say you're in a 5-10 game in a casino, and that your opponents will play back, like call a lot pre-flop and try to make hands against you, or try to fire bluffs at you later on. And in those games, you really need to slow down, or be mindful that they're going to do that and adjust your bluffs and value bets accordingly. So these games, I'm finding that I can really pound, like you saw with the 6-4 suited down there. I can still pound a lot on my 3-bets, but also I can keep my eye out for opponents who are aware about 3-betting, but maybe not so aware that I might be bluff 4-betting them when they decide to bluff 3-bet. So my first goal whenever I sit down in a poker game is to establish where along the poker evolution timeline my opponents are. And they're all different facets, not just pre-flop play, as you see me 3-betting the King-8 suited, with the intent. I think he actually 4-bets me here, so who knows if he was bluffing or not, but I decided to get away. And there are all different ways that poker can evolve. It can evolve in how frequently my opponents c-bet or fire multiple barrels on later streets. It can evolve as far as how thinly my opponents will value bet the river, how often my opponents will go all in as bluffs, And these are all game texture clues that'll teach you where a game is at. So with the pocket eights, by the way, I think it winds up being a similar situation before when I had the ace-jack, and I think I decided just to fire off a fairly sizable bet, thinking that I don't think my opponent can call with a queen when I take this line, because I assume he would think I would just take a showdown if I had a pair below queens. So he's going to most likely put me on a king or a 5. And if I bet, and he's the type of person that would call with a queen, he may also just call with, pocket 7s or pocket 6s, even though they're fairly unlikely, or pocket 3s or deuce for that matter. But yeah, sometimes when I think it's unlikely that my opponent will bluff, and I have some showdown value, but there's a chance my opponent might have just a little more showdown value, I like to just put a bet in, because it really just can't hurt in a spot like that. I mean, unless I've completely misread my opponent and he would call with jacks there, which personally I think would be a poor play, because my range when I'm betting there is so heavily weighted towards hands that beat jacks, that yeah, sometimes I just like to fire a bet in there with made hands and just suspect that I'm going to take it down, because I also just don't think my opponent's going to basically ever bluff if I check there. I could also consider a check raise, which would be a really sneaky play, in case my opponent tries to get cute and go for thinner value with a king or ace queen or something. But that time I just decided to fire a bet. So with the 3-4, this is a funny spot because I decided just to check and call, thinking that once again, if my opponent has an ace, he will continue to bet, and if my opponent doesn't, that he won't. But when he bets 6, I think that I can represent a hand like 2-pair with that jack or queen 10, and then my intention is to bet huge on the river, and it's just going to be damn hard for him to call if he doesn't have basically the nuts or like aces that are slow played or something like that. But that bet sizing to me, his 6 into 12, tells me that he essentially doesn't have a really big hand, because I think he would go for more value if he had turned the nuts or flopped a set or something like that. So I make a little extra money there. Once again, I'm telling you, when you find tight games, small pots are king, because I lost that huge monster pot with the aces against the 7s, but I'm really not even all that stuck, because, and I don't think I bet for value one other single time this entire match. So I think I could be stuck a lot more than I already am if I didn't have a mind to get some good bluffing done. So the 6-8 suited, I could check, maybe check and raise, but I decided just to fire a bet, because this is what I would always do if I was pure bluffing. When he raises me, a lot of players will advocate putting in a big re-raise here to try to get him to fold, but I just don't really see the reason. I sort of just want to call, and if I make a hand, I figured that my opponent will bluff a lot of the cards and make my hand like a hearts or even a 5 or something like that, and I just don't want to give my opponent the opportunity to get away from his bluffs. And likewise, if I go all in, the only time he's calling is if he has a bigger draw than me, or if he has a hand that I'm behind to, like ace-7 or pocket 7s or 4s. So it's a weird spot on the river. I still have my opponent on basically a bluff at this point. I don't think he can have hearts because he checked. And when he has the ace-3 of clubs, I'm really surprised, because I think his line is just awful there. When he raises the flop, I don't know what he's hoping for, really. I mean, because most opponents aren't going to call him down if they have a pair worse than the ace, and he has about the worst kicker you could ever imagine. So I don't think he really benefits by raising at all. So I was surprised to see that. And by the way, my plan was if a 10 came off on the turn and it was like a non-heart, that I was just going to check and assume that he would have trouble continuing his bluff on that card, allowing me to go ahead and bluff the river and take it down. But anyway, that about wraps it up for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I really, really look forward to hearing your feedback, and I'm open to playing basically any games, any limits. So if you have other games you want me to play or other strategies you want me to explore, please let me know. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.